Howdy, I'm Mitchell Whittington from the Visit Jefferson YouTube channel. You know, visitors to town often feel like that Jefferson is a city frozen in time, with its brick streets downtown, carriage rides, antebellum tour homes, and bed and breakfast inns. In fact, Jefferson was designated by the state legislature as the bed and breakfast capital of Texas. Today, it's a popular tourist destination, but back in the 1800s, it was a hustling, bustling riverport town. One of the largest cities in the entire state of Texas, in fact. Shallow drafting paddle wheel steamboats would regularly dock here in town. They began their journey down in New Orleans, came up the Mississippi River to the Red, and then navigated the Red River across the state of Louisiana until they approached a massive log jam. Here's a picture of it. This log jam, known as the Great Red River Raft, was about 100 miles long and completely blocked the river. There was no way through it or around it. The raft had formed naturally over the centuries and actually predates Caddo Indian legend. Well, to continue their journey to Texas, the steamboats would leave the Red River and take 12-mile bayou, then cross Caddo Lake, and finally go to Jefferson via Big Cypress Bayou. They would unload passengers and cargo, then load back up and start the journey back to the Crescent City. For a good part of the 1800s, Jefferson and New Orleans were endpoints on a never-ending trade route. Throughout its history, however, there have been rumors and whispers about something beneath the surface of the city, a network of secret underground tunnels dating back to the early days of Jefferson. Some say they were used to smuggle slaves to freedom as part of the Underground Railroad. Others believe that they were used to bring enslaved people from the slave ships on the river up to the city. Still others contend that during Prohibition, the tunnel system was used for smuggling bootleg whiskey. So where are these mysterious underground tunnels of Jefferson? It would be wonderful if we had a map of the tunnel system that showed all of the entrances, something like you see here. But unfortunately, this is a mock-up like the pictures I've been showing you. No known map exists. You know, one story tells of a tunnel running from the middle of town down to Haywood House beside the bayou, and then all the way out to Twin Oaks Plantation south of town. It seems that the Haywood House, originally built as a hotel, is always somehow connected to the legend of the tunnels. One story has it that it was a stop on the Underground Railroad, while another has a more practical application, that a tunnel went from the hotel to the bayou so that the luggage belonging to the guests could be taken from the steamboats directly to the Haywood House. In 1994, the idea of an underground tunnel system got a bit of steam when a new book was released, and one of the main settings for the book is a tunnel leading to Haywood House. The book is young adult fiction, and it's a very interesting read. I really enjoyed it. The book weaves its fictional story among people, places, and events in Jefferson during Reconstruction, many of them factual. There is no doubt that this book lent some credence to the legend of the tunnels. But has a newspaper ever reported on the tunnels, something to actually give us a factual account? Well, this is the Austin American-Statesman from Sunday, August 11th, 1963. If you turn to page 75, a travel column features a story about Jefferson called Off the Beaten Trail, The Ladies Beat Jay Gould's Curse. It has some wonderful information about the city's history and, of course, as you can tell from the title, the Garden Club and the way they saved the town with tourism. And it also lists a number of things to see and do in town. At one point, the article has some places in town that it calls out, saying, and I quote, "There is the classy Greek simplicity of the manse, Jefferson's oldest, from 1839. And across, the stately, widow's-walked House of the Seasons with its magnificent inner dome. There is the proper brick Presbyterian church and the Methodist steeple that hung the silver bell. There is the shadowy Haywood House with its secret tunnel, the vine-wrapped old Masonic lodge, the splendid French colonial Freeman plantation, and dozens of others whose names, like Falling Leaves, Catalpa Villa, and the Magnolias, suggest themselves." But to top it all off, in the late 1990s, something incredible happened. workers digging near Haywood House found an entrance to an underground tunnel. And here is the actual photo. That must settle everything, right? Well, maybe not. If we start dissecting these tunnel legends, some problems quickly arise. The first of which is the fact that if the cities had a typical amount of rain for the season, you can dig a hole just about anywhere that will fill up with water after just a few feet. The water table simply wouldn't allow for underground tunnels. The Jefferson Historical Museum, a great place to visit while you're in town, by the way, has a basement. It has concrete walls, a concrete floor, and should be watertight. Still, the museum basement has a sump pump down there because after a sizable rain event, the sealed concrete basement tends to flood. You can only imagine how underground dirt tunnels would fare in these conditions. Another problem is the notion of a connection to the Underground Railroad. As noble as an institution as it was, history tells us that the Underground Railroad simply didn't exist in North Texas. On this map, Jefferson is where you see the blue star. In the Lone Star State, the Underground Railroad was in the southern part, smuggling enslaved people across the Rio Grande River to freedom in Mexico, where slavery had been abolished, as you can see in the routes illustrated on the map. If escaped slaves went north from Jefferson, they would simply end up in Indian territory, so the only other logical path out would be to hide on a steamship headed back down the Big Cypress Bayou. There's a problem with that, however. The Red River Raft, that logjam I showed you the picture of. Steamboats could not have headed north on the river because of that. Instead, they'd be southward bound for New Orleans, which certainly would not be an escape to freedom. There were many slave markets in the Crescent City, and escaped slaves would be certainly endangered there. Also, unlike the cities closer to the Gulf, such as Natchez and New Orleans, Jefferson did not have a slave market. Certainly, the large slave ships could never have navigated the waterways to the city, so neither the story of the Underground Railroad nor the idea of tunnels being used to transport slaves have any credibility at all when viewed through the lens of history. But what about the other locations associated with the tunnels? One legend dictates that the tunnels go all the way out to Twin Oaks Plantation south of town, and that it might even be the endpoint for one of the tunnels. Looking closely, problems tend to arise with this as well. Twin Oaks is actually a couple of miles south of town, a long way to dig and maintain an underground tunnel. The other issue is that Twin Oaks really isn't that old, at least in the grand scheme of things. It was built around 1970, give or take a couple of years, and it was supposedly built as a replica of Devereaux, a historic home in Natchez, Mississippi. Now, if a tunnel did run 2 miles out of town, back in the 1800s, this would be a lot to maintain, and there'd be no real reason to do it. Once you got out of sight of town, come up, and then you're on the surface where you have a lot of freedom to move around. That makes a lot more sense than digging an extra couple of miles all the way out to where Twin Oaks is today. And like I said, Twin Oaks is relatively new, even though there was a house out there prior to that. When they were building the new Twin Oaks plantation, there were no indications of a tunnel or an entrance or anything like that. Surely it would have come up during all that new construction. Also, note that a tunnel from the center of town all the way out to Twin Oaks would have to go underneath the Big Cypress Bayou, our river, which would introduce a myriad of other difficulties. The other place that's quite often mentioned with the tunnel legend is Haywood House. Now, Haywood House was advertised as the finest hotel west of the Mississippi, and at the time was the largest building in Jefferson. Construction started in 1865 after the war and was completed several years later. Built by Georgia-born H.P. Mabry, it was originally 4 stories high and extended the full length of Market Street from Dallas Street to Lake Street. During reconstruction, 3 fires struck downtown Jefferson and the hotel was reduced to a quarter of its original size. Over the years, it has since been used as a museum, a private residence, and at the time of this recording, a restaurant. There are a number of problems with the stories of the Haywood House Tunnel. The first is that it couldn't have been used with the Underground Railroad. The Civil War had already ended and slavery had been abolished by the time the hotel was built. Jefferson was also occupied by the watchful eyes of Union troops during Reconstruction. Then there's the theory that a luggage loading tunnel existed from the bayou so that luggage from the steamships could be taken directly to the Haywood house. Well, the steamboats didn't come quite that far, however. The wharfs where they docked were at the turning basin at least 3 blocks downriver from the hotel. Once the luggage had been taken off the boats and put onto wagons at the docks, it would be a simple task to just move it down Dallas Street to Haywood House. No tunnels needed. And how about the Austin American-Statesman newspaper in August of 1963 that we looked at earlier? It had that mention of, quote, "There is a shadowy Haywood house with its secret tunnel," end quote. Well, a little research turns up the fact that this was a syndicated travel column and appeared that very same Sunday in newspapers all across the state. The Tyler Courier-Times, the Austin American-Statesman, the San Antonio Express and News, San Angelo Standard-Times, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the Victoria Advocate, and the Waco Tribune-Herald. 8 years later, the article was recycled in the column and ran in 3 more newspapers, the El Paso Times, the Austin American-Statesman again, and once more in the San Angelo Standard-Times. The writer who originally penned the article obviously found some mention of the Haywood house and maybe a tunnel with it, so he wrote up that cute little mysterious entry about it and then spread the legend all across the Lone Star State. Don't forget about the Haunted Tunnel book. Above everything else, this is a fictional story, and you know that going in. And like I said before, it's not a bad one. I really enjoyed it. In the book itself, the author includes an appendix in the back identifying which things are real and which ones are from her imagination. When it comes to the underground tunnels, she puts them in the true section and says, and I quote, "The tunnel is more legend than truth. It is still debated in Jefferson if there actually was one and exactly what it was used for. There is a cement casing with iron rings going into the ground where the docks used to be, and there was a hole in the basement of the Haywood House Hotel. Some folks declare the tunnel was there. Some say it was not." End quote. There's also the rumor that the underground tunnels were used for running bootleg moonshine. And to be honest, that simply wasn't necessary. If you knew who to talk to, it was easy enough to get a mason jar of shine. Not long ago, a Jefferson historian was telling me that back in the day, if you wanted a drink, you would simply go to a particular barber shop, sit in the chair to have your shoes shined. You would then mention a keyword or phrase to the person doing the shining, and by the time he was finished, there would be a paper sack beside your chair with a mason jar in it. There was no need for underground tunnels. The stills were located deep in the woods, and still are. Yes, Marion County, like a lot of places in East Texas, still has moonshine production if you know who to talk to. But these days it's so much easier, and definitely safer, to just go to the local liquor store where they have a full selection of moonshine of many different flavors, all perfectly legal. And finally, the piece de resistance, the actual tunnel discovery at the Haywood House with a photo in the local newspaper. Well, this did actually happen when the owner of the Haywood House at that time was having a huge stump of a pecan tree dug up, and the workers encountered a tunnel made of, quote, "sturdy red bricks," end quote, about 3 feet below the ground. The newspaper goes on to say, quote, "It's unlikely the tunnel was used for any kind of transport, however, as its dimensions would allow only a very small child to pass through it. The underground passageway measures only 2 feet in height and 1 foot in width. The workers that unearthed the tunnel while digging out the tree found a few items inside, including pieces of a white dinner plate, an old belt buckle, and a Coca-Cola can from the 1970s. The, quote, tunnel, unquote, is almost certainly a small drainage passage. The photo below shows a worker with the entrance to the tiny tunnel. When I learned of it, I contacted the robotics lab teacher at Jefferson High School to see if they had a small, truck-like robot with a camera on it. I hoped that we could open the tunnel again and send the robot off exploring, but it just never panned out. Would have been interesting, though. Jefferson is a town of many mysteries and secrets to uncover, but unfortunately, the secret tunnels just aren't one of them. Probably the strongest evidence against the tunnels is a statement from my friend Sam Mosley, whose family owned the Haywood House when he was a boy. When I posed the question to him about the tunnels, he said, and I quote, "I hear all those tales too. One evening, I almost stopped the man driving the horse-drawn carriage when I heard him telling passengers how slaves used the tunnels to go to the boats on the river that were part of the Underground Railroad. I never heard anything like that until I was grown. It certainly was never talked about or imagined when my great aunts Lizzie Haywood and Carrie Mosley lived there. I assure you that when we were growing up, there would have been no stopping us if we had any suspicion of a, quote, secret tunnel, end quote. I also have other friends that grew up in Jefferson who never heard mention of a tunnel, and to me, that's pretty much the nail in the coffin of the secret underground tunnels of Jefferson. Kids hear everything. And like my friend Sam told me, quote, there would be no stopping us if we had any suspicion of a secret tunnel, end quote. Personally, I'm genuinely bummed out that the tunnels aren't real. I'd love it if they were. I'd probably quit my day job as a writer and dedicate my time to exploring, mapping, and documenting the tunnel system. In fact, you'd probably be watching one of my tunnel exploration videos right now instead of this one. No, I wouldn't rest until I found my way inside them. But alas, that's not meant to be. The tunnels are simply a Jefferson myth. Don't be too disappointed, though. There are many more things to explore here in town. And like I said, some of them are very secretive and mysterious in their own right. Well, thanks for watching this video, and if you liked it, please hit the thumbs up like button below. The YouTube overlords pay attention to that kind of thing, and it doesn't cost you a cent. If you'd like to hear more legends and lore about the old Riverport of Jefferson, just hit the subscribe button. That doesn't cost anything either, and in fact, all that happens is you get a notice by email when I add a new video. Nothing more sinister than that. Anyway, thanks so much for watching the Visit Jefferson YouTube channel. I really, really appreciate it, and I hope to see you around town very soon.